The ancient Hebrews, whether you choose to call them Yasharal, Israelites, or Jews, looked like black Africans according to science, ancient historical records, and scripture. Anthropologists who have conducted facial reconstructions of ancient skulls found in Palestine have stated that the facial features, muscle attachments, nose, lips, eyes, and skull dimensions are consistent with that of black Africans. Even the genotype of the most ancient sedentary civilizations found in Palestine, that of the Natuvians, is consistent with that of the black Africans. The Natuvians belong to the E-P2 haplogroup, also known as E1b1 haplogroup. E1b1 is the parental haplogroup of both E1b1a and the E1b1b haplogroups. The ancient historical records of the Egyptians, Assyrians, Greeks, and Romans also bear witness to the African phenotype of the ancient Hebrews. Egyptian paintings and sculptures of Hebrews depicted them as black. There is an Egyptian painting of Hebrew slaves making bricks in the tomb of Visor Rekhmire. There are also Egyptian figurines of black Hebrew slaves in the Hetch Museum of Haifa, Israel, and the Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology in London. Even the Assyrians depicted arguably black Hebrew captives from the Judean city of Lachish with short, tightly curled hair and beards in their carved wall reliefs. The Greeks also depicted the ancient Hebrews as black. Black Chaldeans with their black Hebrew captives are depicted in an 11th century Bristol Psalter painting. In Book 16 of the Geography, the Greek historian Strabo linked the Hebrews to the Egyptians, saying that the ancestors of the present Judeans at the temple in Jerusalem were the Egyptians. In Book 5 of the Histories, Roman historian Tacitus wrote that many people of his time believed that the Jews were of Ethiopian origin, or that they were the overflowing population of Egypt. This was among a few other speculated origin stories dealing with Africa or other black peoples. There are also several references to the African phenotype of ancient Hebrews within Scripture. There is the case of Joseph being mistaken for an Egyptian by his own brothers. This simply isn't a case of him wearing Egyptian clothing. It had to do with his physical appearance, his phenotype. Later in the book of Bereshit, the entire nation of Yasharal are mistaken for Egyptians by Canaanites, who are blood relatives to the Egyptians. Moshe was mistaken for an Egyptian by Ethiopians, who along with the Canaanites are also blood relatives to the Egyptians. Even the story of Moshe's hand and Miriam turning leprous, white as snow, is an indication of what their original color was. Shaul, also known as Apostle Paul, was mistaken to be an Egyptian by a Greek-speaking Roman guard. When Herod sought the life of Yahusha when he was just a child, his parents took him down to Egypt to hide among the Egyptians. This is the same Yahusha described as having feet like bronze and hair like wool. The Book of Bereshit, Genesis, chapter 42, verses 6 through 8. And Joseph was the governor over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. And Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them. But he acted as a stranger to them and spoke to them harshly, and said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. The Book of Bereshit, chapter 45, verses 1 through 4. And Joseph was unable to restrain himself before all those who stood by him. And he called out, "Have everyone go out from me." So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, and the Mitzrites and the house of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were unable to answer him, for they trembled before him. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." And when they came near, he said, "I'm Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Mitzrayim." The book of Bereshit, Genesis, chapter 50, verses 7 through 11. And Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Mitzrayim, and all the house of Joseph and his brothers and his father's house. Only their little ones and their flocks and their herds they left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. And they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, and they lamented there with a great and very heavy lamentation. And he performed 7 days of mourning for his father. And when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, "This is a grievous mourning for the Mitzrayites." That is why its name is called Abel Mitzrayim, which is beyond the Jordan. The book of Shemot, Exodus chapter 2, verses 16 through 21. And the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But the shepherds came and drove them away. Then Moshe stood up and came to their rescue, and watered their flock. And they came to Reuel their father, and he said, "How is it that you've come so soon today?" And they said, "A Mitzrayim rescued us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock." And he said to his daughters, "And where is he? Why did you leave the man? Call him and let him eat bread." And Moshe agreed to dwell with the man, and he gave Sephora his daughter to Moshe. The book of Bamidbar, Numbers, chapter 12, verse 1. Now Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moshe because of the Cushite woman whom he had taken, for he had taken a Cushite woman. The book of Shemot, Exodus, chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. And Yahuwah said to him again, "Now put your hand in your bosom." And he put his hand in his bosom. And when he took it out, and see, his hand was leprous, like snow. And he said, "Put your hand in your bosom again." So he put his hand in his bosom again, and see, it was restored like his other flesh. And it shall be, if they do not believe you, nor listen to the voice of the first sign, they shall believe the voice of the latter sign. The book of Bamidbar, Numbers, chapter 12, verses 9 through 10. And the displeasure of Yahuwah burned against them, and he left. And the cloud turned away from above the tent, and look, Miriam was leprous, as white as snow. And Aaron turned towards Miriam, and look, a leper. The book of Masai, Acts, chapter 21, verses 37 to 39. And as Shaul was about to be led into the barracks, he said to the commander, "Am I allowed to speak to you?" And he said, "Do you know Greek? Are you not the Mitzrayim who some time ago stirred up a revolt and led 4,000 assassins out into the wilderness?" But Shaul replied, "I'm a Yehudi from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city, and I beg you allow me to speak to the people." The book of Hosea, chapter 11, verse 1. When Yasharal was a child, I loved him, and out of Mitzrayim I called my son. The book of Matithyahu, Matthew, chapter 2, verses 13 through 15. And when they had left, see, a messenger of Yahuwah appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, take the child and his mother, and flee to Mitzrayim, and remain there until I bring you word. For Herod is about to seek the child to destroy him. And rising up, he took the child and his mother by night and departed for Mitzrayim, and remained there until the death of Herod, to fulfill what was spoken by Yahuwah through the prophet, saying, Out of Mitzrayim I have called my son. The olive skin deception. Wikipedia defines olive skin in this way. Olive skin is a human skin color spectrum. It is often associated with pigmentation in the type 3 to type 4 and type 5 ranges of the Fitzpatrick scale. It generally refers to light or moderate brown, brownish, or tan skin, and it is often described as having yellowish, greenish, or golden undertones. People with olive skin can sometimes become more pale if their sun exposure is limited. Lighter olive skin tans more easily than does fair skin, and generally still retains notable yellow or greenish undertones. This modern definition of olive skin is nonsense. It ignores the true historical use of the term. Olives ripen in this way, from green to black. The Fitzpatrick scale ranges from type 1 to type 6. True olive skin tone ranges from type 4 to type 6 on the Fitzpatrick scale, and does not include type 3. However, because of propaganda, you will see people such as Gal Gadot with type 3 skin tone represented most often in the media as being olive-skinned. This is simply not true. No matter which way you slice it, green olives, dark brown olives, or black olives, type 3 is not olive skin tone. The white North Africa deception. An honorary white is a non-white person who is classified as white for the purposes of white supremacy. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, they define a white person as a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. Jared Diamond, Guns, Germs, and Steel, page 378. Whites, ranging from Egyptians and Libyans to Moroccans, occupy Africa's north coastal zone and the northern Sahara. Those North Africans would hardly be confused with blue-eyed, blonde-haired Swedes, but most lay people would still call them whites because they have lighter skin and straighter hair than peoples to the south termed blacks. Time. Egyptian immigrant wants to be reclassified as black. Mustafa Hefni feels he's been black his whole life. The U.S. government doesn't agree. By Ayan Zafar, September 7, 2012. Anyone who's ever filled out a census document or taken the SAT is familiar with that odd moment when you have to bubble in your racial classification. For many, the choices are confusing, limiting, and problematic. In the end, each person bubbles in what they feel best represents their identity. But when Mustafa Hefni immigrated to the United States from Egypt in 1978, he didn't get a say in that decision. KMT, Kemet, a modern journal of ancient Egypt, Volume 19, Number 4, Winter 2008-2009, Egypt and Portugal, the Gulbenkian Collection, page 68. The Gulbenkian Museum's painted ebony funerary statuette, dated to the 11th dynasty, purportedly was found in the area of Deir el-Bahari at Luxor. Because of its unusual appearance, its authenticity has been debated by scholars. National Geographic, February 2008. The Black Pharaohs, Conquerors of Ancient Egypt, page 59. Did the powerful Queen Tai, King Tut's grandmother, have Nubian ancestry? This bust made of wood that has darkened with age has inspired claims that she did. National Geographic, June 2005. The New Face of King Tut.
The artificial whitewashing of Hamitic North Africans through verbal alchemy backfires and is exposed for what it really is when a real white person is killed by one of these honorary whites, as in the case of Muhammad Noor, the Minneapolis Somali police officer who feared for his life and fatally shot Justine Damon. In this case, his honorary white status was revoked and the media began to focus on his blackness, emphasizing that he was a black Somali police officer, and then just settling for black cop kills unarmed white woman.
The land of Ham is the dividing line between so-called white Africa and black Africa, and this includes the Horn of Africa, where you find Somalia. Rudolph Windsor, From Babylon to Timbuktu, page 55. The third son of Ham is Phut, sometimes written Put. The descendants of Put have been found in the entire area below the Sahara Desert. They use the names Futa, Ful, Fulas, Pul, Pulbe, and Fulbe. These tribes have disseminated themselves across Africa from Somaliland to Senegal. Professor Godby says that they have prefixed their names to almost every district of any extent to which they have ever occupied. They have Futatoro near Senegal, Futajalon and Futabondu to the north of Sierra Leone. There is also Futakasson, Futazora, Futaferlo, and Futadugu. Mungo Park, Travels in the Interior of Africa, page 53. The Fulas of Bondu are naturally of a mild and gentle disposition, but the uncharitable maxims of the Quran have made them less hospitable to strangers and more reserved in their behavior than the Mandingos. They evidently consider all the Negro natives as their inferiors, and when talking of different nations, always rank themselves among the white people. Stanley Lane Poole, The Story of the Moors in Spain. John G. Jackson's Introduction. In ancient times, Africans in general were called Ethiopians. In medieval times, most Africans were called Moors. In modern times, some Africans were called Negroes. The Ethiopians were named by the Greeks. The word Ethiopian means burnt face, from the Greek names Ethios plus face. This description referred to the dark complexion of these Africans, which the Greeks attributed to sunburn. In the literature on Africa, Africans are commonly identified in two groups, one progressive, the other backward. The progressive peoples are called Hamites, Cushites, Moors, etc., whereas the backward ones are called Negroes. The word Negro comes from the Latin word Niger, meaning black. Hamites, Cushites, and Moors were also black, but they have been inducted into the white race. Zondervan's Pictorial Bible Dictionary. Ham, the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood, and one of the 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. Ivan van Sertima, Golden Age of the Moor. Slavery was aggravated by the rather distorted demands of capitalism. Rulers in the Sudan were ready and willing to comply because of the money involved. Apart from this, they conceived of themselves as possessing ethnicities different from the people they sold. The 18th century saw not only the economic ascendancy of Europe, but a great devaluation of African humanity south of the Sahara. And according to a recent writer, while Turks, Arabs, and Berbers would marry their daughters off to European slaves, marriage to a man of the Sudan, slave or free, was considered denigrating. George Francis Dow, Slave Ships Enslaving, page 1. Not long after the Gulf of Guinea was discovered by Portuguese navigators, and at least 2 decades before Columbus sailed from Palos, a slave market was set up at Lisbon, at which Negroes from the Guinea coast were sold to any who would buy. It was the Moors who had told the Portuguese of the black-skinned people living in great numbers to the south of the Great Desert, a race cursed of God and predestined as slaves. Mungo Park, Travels in the Interior of Africa, page 103. The difficulties we had already encountered, the unsettled state of the country, and above all, the savage and overbearing deportment of the Moors, had so completely frightened my attendants that they declared they would rather relinquish every claim to reward than proceed one step further to the eastward. Indeed, the danger they incurred of being seized by the Moors and sold into slavery became every day more apparent, and I could not condemn their apprehensions. Mungo Park, Travels in the Interior of Africa, page 123. The Moors set a very high value upon their horses, for it is by their superior fleetness that they are enabled to make so many predatory excursions into the Negro countries. They feed them 3 or 4 times a day, and generally give them a large quantity of sweet milk in the evening, which the horses appear to relish very much. Mungo Park, Travels in the Interior of Africa, page 131. As I had some reason to suspect that the succeeding day was also to be considered a fast, I went in the morning to the Negro town of Farani and begged some provisions from the duty, who readily supplied my wants and desired me to come to his house every day during my stay in the neighborhood. These hospitable people are looked upon by the Moors as an abject race of slaves, and are treated accordingly. Mungo Park, Travels in the Interior of Africa, page 138. The natural barrenness of the country is such that it furnishes but few materials for manufacture. The Moors, however, contrive to weave a strong cloth with which they cover their tents. The thread is spun by their women from the hair of goats, and they prepare the hides of their cattle so as to furnish saddles, bridles, pouches, and other articles of leather. They are likewise sufficiently skilled to convert the native iron which they procure from the Negroes into spears and knives, and also into pots for boiling their food. But their sabers and other weapons, as well as their firearms and ammunition, they purchase from the Europeans in exchange for Negro slaves, which they obtain in their predatory excursions. Their chief commerce of this kind is with the French traders on the Senegal River. Mungo Park, Travels in the Interior of Africa, page 146. I have observed that the Moors in their complexion resemble the mulattoes of the West Indies, but they have something unpleasant in their aspect which the mulattoes have not. I have fancied that I have discovered in the features of most of them a disposition towards cruelty and low cunning, and I could never contemplate their physiognomy without feeling sensible uneasiness. From the staring wildness of their eyes, a stranger would immediately set them down as a nation of lunatics. The treachery and malevolence of their character are manifest in their plundering excursions against the Negro villages. Oftentimes without the smallest provocation, and sometimes under the fairest professions of friendship, they will suddenly seize upon the Negroes' cattle, and even on the inhabitants themselves. The Negroes very seldom retaliate. The enterprising boldness of the Moors, their knowledge of the country, and, above all, the superior fleetness of their horses, make them such formidable enemies that the petty Negro states, which border upon the desert, are in continual terror while the Moorish tribes are in the vicinity, and are too much awed to think of resistance. H.B. Dewing, Procopius, History of the Wars, pages 287 to 291. And now, since the narration of the history has brought me to this point, it is necessary to tell from the beginning whence the nation of the Moors came to Libya and how they settled there. When the Hebrews had withdrawn from Egypt and had come near the boundaries of Palestine, Moses, a wise man, who was their leader on the journey, died, and the leadership was passed on to Joshua, the son of Nun, who led his people into Palestine, and, by displaying a valor in war greater than that natural to a man, gained possession of the land. And after overthrowing all the nations, he easily won the cities, and he seemed to be altogether invincible. Now at that time the whole country along the sea from Sidon as far as the boundaries of Egypt was called Phoenicia. And one king in ancient times held sway over it, as is agreed by all who have written the earliest accounts of the Phoenicians. In that country there dwelt various populous tribes, Girgasites and the Jebusites, and some others with other names by which they are called in the history of the Hebrews. Now when these nations saw that the invading general was an irresistible prodigy, they emigrated from their ancestral homes and made their way to Egypt, which adjoined their country. And finding there no place sufficient for them to dwell in, since there has been a great population in Egypt from ancient times, they proceeded to Libya. And they established numerous cities and took possession of the whole of Libya, as far as the Pillars of Hercules. And there they have lived even up to my time, using the Phoenician tongue. They also built a fortress in Numidia, where now is the city called Tagesis. In that place are 2 columns made of white stone near the great spring, having Phoenician letters cut into them, which say in the Phoenician tongue, "We are they who fled from before the face of Joshua, the robber, the son of Nun." There were also other nations settled in Libya before the Moors, who on account of having been established there from of old were said to be children of the soil. And because of this, they said that Antaeus, their king, who wrestled with Hercules in Clypea, was a son of the earth. And in latter times, those who removed from Phoenicia with Dido came to the inhabitants of Libya as to kinsmen, and they willingly allowed them to found and hold Carthage. But as time went on, Carthage became a powerful and populous city, and a battle took place between them and their neighbors, who, as has been said, had come from Palestine before them and are called Moors at the present time. And the Carthaginians defeated them and compelled them to live a very great distance away from Carthage. Later on, the Romans gained the supremacy over all of them in war, and settled the Moors at the extremity of the inhabited land of Libya, and made the Carthaginians and other Libyans subject and tributary to themselves. And after this the Moors won many victories over the Vandals, and gained possession of the land now called Mauritania, extending from Gadira as far as the boundaries of Caesarea, as well as the most of Libya which remained. Such then is the story of the settlement of the Moors in Libya. It should be clear now that the ancient Hebrews possessed a phenotype similar to that of the sons of Ham: Mitzrayim, Cush, Phut, and Canaan. Their skin complexion ranging from type 4 to type 6 on the Fitzpatrick scale. Their hair texture normally being type 3 to type 4, ranging from loose curls to tightly coiled hair. And their facial features and bone structure resembling that of black Africans. Because of this, the Europeans sought to include the sons of Ham into the white race, and by extension, the Hebrews. This was so that they could slowly replace the African image of the Hebrews and the Hamites with that of the European. As you can see, Mustafa Hefny and Muhammad Noor are both honorary whites according to the U.S. Census Bureau. However, because Muhammad Noor shot and killed an unarmed white woman, his honorary white status was revoked, and in the media they began referring to him as a black Somali cop, then black Muslim cop, and finally just a black cop. At that point, blue lives didn't matter anymore, and labeling him black foreshadowed his murder conviction. You should be able to clearly see why these Hamitic North Africans are given honorary white status. On one hand, when talking about the accomplishments of the Egyptians, Europeans want to include them in the white race, because they know that both Greece and Rome were heavily influenced by black Egyptian culture. On the other hand, when talking about the slave trade, Europeans find it useful to say that they are black, so that they can take some of the blame off themselves for the slave trade by saying that blacks sold blacks into slavery. The Moors are the same group of Canaanites spoken of in the book of Yoel, who would end up selling the people of Yehuda and Jerusalem to the sons of Yawan, who are the Europeans dwelling on the opposite side of the Mediterranean. All of this has led us to this point. We are living in the time when the fake Jews, according to Revelation chapter 2, verse 9, and Revelation chapter 3, verse 9, are living in the land proclaiming that they are the descendants of the ancient Israelites for the purposes of setting up the third temple so that the anti-Messiah can claim that he is Elohim. This is part of the great delusion spoken of in the book of Thessalonican Bet, 2 Thessalonians. But who will believe us? You need to be able to see that the religion of Christianity was designed to keep us blind to the truth and mentally enslaved. The book of 1 Maccabees, chapter 3, verses 47 to 48. They fasted that day, put on sackcloth and sprinkled ashes on their heads, and tore their clothes, and laid open the book of the law wherein the heathen had sought to paint the likeness of their images. Lothrop Stoddard, The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy, page 69. Insofar as he is Christianized, the Negro's savage instincts will be restrained and he will be disposed to acquiesce in white tutelage. Charles Colcock Jones, The Religious Instruction of the Negroes. To this may be imputed the small care that have been taken to convert the Negroes of our plantations, who to the infamy of England and scandal of the world continue as heathen under Christian masters, and in Christian countries, which would never be if our planters were rightly instructed and made sensible that they disappointed their own baptism by denying it to those who belong to them, that it would be of advantage to their affairs to have slaves who would obey in all things their masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart as fearing God, that the gospel liberty consists with temporal servitude, and that their slaves would only become better slaves by being Christians. Jones, page 134. The first objection is this. If we suffer our Negroes to be instructed, the tendency will be to change the civil relations of society as now constituted. To which let it be replied, we separate entirely their religious and their civil condition and contend that one may be attended to without interfering with the other. Jones, page 135. We maintain that in the judicious religious instruction there will be no necessary interference with their civil condition. The religious teacher must step out of his way for the purpose. The objection, it will be perceived, is leveled against the influence of the gospel itself. And if the gospel will subvert the institutions of our society, then we should fear to be instructed in it ourselves and banish it altogether. And who would entertain such a monstrous proposition? Jones, page 140. A fourth objection, the Negroes will embrace seasons of religious worship for originating and executing plans of insubordination and villainy. This might be the case if they were allowed to congregate on plantations at night and at places of worship on the Sabbath without a proper regulation of their assemblies, or any supervision of a responsible white teacher or of the planters themselves.
The Bible, a single volume that is like no other. The so-called Slave Bible, remarkable not for what's in it, but for what's not.
So about 90% of the Old Testament's been removed and about 50% of the New Testament's been removed. To put it another way, a normal King James Version has 1,189 chapters in it. The Slave Bible has only 232.
Missing are chapters and verses that might have encouraged uprisings. Book of Exodus, redacted. No story of Moses demanding Pharaoh, "Let my people go." Gone is Galatians, and the verse, "There is neither bond nor free, for ye are all one in Christ Jesus." And no Jeremiah, "Woe unto him that useth his neighbor's service without wages."
What they've left in are verses such as Ephesians 6:5, which is the famous verse, "Slaves, be obedient to your master."
Looking at this Bible, it's hard to tell that anything's been taken out of it.
That's correct. I mean, it looks like a normal book. For many enslaved Africans, this would have been the first time they were exposed to the Bible.
A Bible selectively edited to instill obedience, using religion to underpin the horror of slavery.
When people encounter this exhibit, what lasting impression do you want them to leave with?
But we want to pass the message on that may this never happen again. The Bible itself is a whole book. It's not one that you get to carve up and use this piece or that piece.
The Slave Bible designed to repress rebellion, but it didn't work. Enslaved people in the Caribbean constantly fought against slavery until emancipation.
I think it's very relevant to understand our history, not just American history, but our African American history, our roots and how we got to this point.
A dark chapter in the history of the good book. Jeff Bennett, NBC News, Washington.